My name is Kerensa Vance. I was 32 the year a simple cardboard expansion envelope tore my family completely apart. It began on a crisp Saturday in mid-October, the day my grandmother reached her 79th year. She had baked her signature almond torte with spun sugar lattices, a tradition older than my own memory. Her dining table was meticulously prepared: 8 linen napkins, her grandmother's heirloom china, and a jar of dried lavender from her back garden. Yet the chairs remained entirely empty. My parents had flown to Vail for an early ski weekend. My brother Tristan merely fired off a text message at 4:15. "Happy birthday, Gran. The powder up here is unbelievable." My father couldn't even bother to type a word. My mother, meanwhile, shared a pristine, wind-blown selfie in her designer ski gear to her charity committee group chat, captioning it "truly favored." I managed to escape my shifts at the county deeds registry in Hartford, driving 3 agonizing hours through the autumn twilight. When I finally unlocked her front door, she was sitting motionless in the dim kitchen. The tiny decorative candles had melted into pools of colored wax across the torte. The vanilla bean ice cream had completely liquefied inside its container. She stared up at me with wide, hollow eyes, as though struggling to determine if I was a ghost or flesh and blood. I didn't say a word. I just sliced into the torte, lit a single match, and softly sang to her. The following morning, while scrubbing the flour from her counters, a pair of strangers stepped onto her porch. They presented me with a heavy, string-tied packet, bearing my grandmother's unmistakable signature across the flap. The revelations contained within those pages effectively erased the family I thought I belonged to. That lonely evening remains permanently etched into my mind, heavy and unyielding. I had fled my office at 5 o'clock sharp, still wearing my scuffed work loafers, with a cheap supermarket bouquet rolling around on the floor mat of my old sedan. 3 hours of battling the relentless semi-trucks on the highway gave way to the narrow, winding back roads of Oak Haven. There, the ancient maples leaned over the asphalt like the vaulted ceilings of an old stone church. My tires crunched into her gravel driveway at exactly 12 minutes past 8. A single gold porch light cast long shadows. Every other window in the entire house was pitch black. Stepping inside, the quiet kitchen revealed the brutal reality of the day. 8 pristine place settings. A glass vase holding faded lavender she had cut with her own hands that morning. The almond torte sat perfectly centered, the pink icing numbers reading 79 sinking slightly into the crust. The candles had burned down to tiny, jagged plastic holders embedded in the frosting. A cardboard brick of Neapolitan ice cream had sweated a dark puddle onto her clean white tablecloth. She sat perfectly upright at the head of the long table, wrapped in her favorite emerald green cardigan, her frail fingers wrapped tightly around a glass of tap water. "Kerensa?" she breathed, her brow furrowing deeply a second later. "Is it Thursday already?" "It's Saturday, Gran," I whispered, kneeling beside her chair. "Your birthday." "Oh," she murmured, her thumb gently tracing the edge of the plate. I must have confused it with the parish bake sale. I placed the wilted market flowers into a jar and served us both a piece. We ate with our fingers, neither of us wanting to disturb the quiet by rattling silverware. I ended up singing the birthday song twice through because she lost the thread of the words during the first attempt and softly asked me to start over. By 10 o'clock, I practically carried her up the stairs to her bedroom. She felt entirely weightless in my arms, her small wrists barely thicker than a wooden rolling pin. As I smoothed the heavy patchwork quilt up to her chin, her eyes suddenly cleared. The cloudy, distant look vanished, replaced by a terrifyingly sharp focus, like an old transistor radio locking onto a clear frequency through a wall of static. "They think I am blind to what they are doing," she rasped, her grip tightening on my wrist with surprising strength. I held my breath, waiting for her to explain, but her fingers immediately loosened, and her breathing steadied into deep sleep. To understand why this shattered me, you have to understand the Vance family dynamic. The Vances of Oak Haven possessed that highly specific brand of quiet, generational Connecticut wealth. My father, Alastair, had spent decades managing commercial real estate portfolios until he could shift into advisory roles, which mostly meant yachting 4 days a week. My mother, Evelyn, directed local heritage boards and organized silent auctions for the hospital. My brother, Tristan, operated a boutique luxury construction firm called Vance Custom Estates, driving a pristine electric sports car that cost triple my annual take-home pay. Then there was me. I was the family's administrative clerk, owning $45,000 a year at a tiny 3-person title search firm downtown while burying my head in case files every evening. To them, my career was an amusing little hobby, something my mother would dismissively chuckle about at Thanksgiving dinners as Kerensa's cute little paperwork routine. I never wasted my breath arguing with them. I preferred the absolute certainty of public land records over their high society posturing. But this old house belonged to me in every emotional sense, even if my name wasn't on the deed. I had scraped my knees on these linoleum floors as a toddler. Maria had taught me how to read a property survey on the back porch when I turned 20, her reading glasses sliding down her nose, a blue ink pen tucked securely behind her ear. She was the one who co-signed for my tiny studio apartment when my parents flatly refused, claiming I needed to learn financial independence. That night, I slept in her small spare room, tracking the familiar hairline fractures in the plaster ceiling. Around midnight, a thirst brought me down the hall. Rummaging on a shelf behind a heavy silver-framed family portrait, my fingers brushed against a thick card. It belonged to a woman named Clarissa Thorne, an executive at Thorne & Company Real Estate. On the reverse side, a handwritten note read, "Estimated market value, $720,000. Cash buyer waiting for immediate liquidation." I replaced the card exactly as I found it. My hands remained perfectly steady, but a cold, heavy knot formed deep in my stomach. On Sunday morning, I systematically scrubbed the kitchen while Maria dozed in her faded velvet recliner. The torte went into plastic containers. The ruined candles went into the trash. I wiped the sticky frosting from the good china and stacked them back into the dark cabinets. At exactly 10:15, heavy footsteps crossed the porch. The woman appeared to be in her early 60s, wearing a tailored charcoal wool coat and holding a stiff leather document case. The man beside her was younger, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a portable notary seal in a zippered leather pouch. "Kerensa Vance?" the woman asked clearly. "Yes," I replied, stepping outside. "My name is Beatrix Hawthorne. This is my associate, Julian Finch. Your grandmother retained our legal services 14 months ago." She pulled a thick, heavy manila folder from her bag, bound tightly with a wax-imprinted paper seal. My grandmother's full name was written across the tab in dark blue ink. "She gave us strict instructions to hand this directly to you," Beatrix said, her voice dropping to a quiet, serious register. "Personally, when the time was right." "The right time for what?" I demanded, glancing back through the glass at my grandmother's sleeping form. Beatrix's sharp expression softened slightly. "Come to my office on Charter Oak Avenue whenever you are ready. Here is my direct card. Do not mention this delivery to your parents before we speak." They were back in their sedan and reversing down the driveway before I could utter another word. I stood on the porch, the weight of the envelope surprising me. It felt like at least 50 pages of dense bond paper. The wax seal was signed directly across the binding in Maria's elegant, looping cursive. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text message from my mother. "Who is parked in the driveway? Do not sign any documents, Kerensa." I turned the phone completely silent, laid it face down on the railing, and carried the heavy folder inside. I sat down at the empty kitchen table. right where the untouched birthday cake had mocked her the night before, and carefully ran my thumb along the wax seal. Maria's signature cut right through the adhesive. Every slant of the letters was unmistakable. The grand, exaggerated curve of the M, the precise spacing of the vowels. There was no hesitation in these lines. This was executed by a woman who possessed absolute clarity about what she was authorizing. I carefully sliced the seal open. Inside lay a pristine sequence of heavy legal documents that I recognized instantly from my title work. A recorded quitclaim deed, an irrevocable property trust, a durable power of attorney, fully notarized witness addendums, and a formal neurological evaluation on hospital letterhead dated over a year ago. Clipped to the very front was a small sheet of cream stationery. In that same deliberate blue ink, it read, "Kerensa, when they finally come to take the house away from me, open this packet. Every weapon you need is inside. I love you, and I am so sorry to put this burden on your shoulders, but it has to be you." I read those sentences 4 times, the phrase, "when they come to take the house away from me," echoing louder with each pass. Not if, when. She had anticipated this. 14 months ago, before the memory lapses became terrifying, I recognized every single paragraph from my days buried in property law. The first item was an ironclad revocable living trust. 14 months ago, Maria had transferred the physical house, the underlying deed, the title, and every fixture attached to it directly into the Maria H. Vance Revocable Living Trust. She remained the primary trustee as long as her mind held out. But I was explicitly named as the sole successor trustee. The second she lost legal capacity, the absolute control of the property bypassed my father, ignored my brother, and landed squarely in my lap. The second item was a durable power of attorney. She had appointed me as her exclusive agent for all financial and medical decisions. The durable clause meant the document didn't dissolve when her memory began to fracture. Instead, that was exactly the moment it locked into place. The third item was a detailed clinical evaluation. Dr. Linwood had examined her on that exact day in August, officially documenting her complete testamentary capacity. So, technically speaking, she doesn't actually own this property anymore, I said, tracing the embossed notary seal with my thumb. Beatrix Hawthorne nodded sharply from across the conference table. Exactly. The trust owns it. No one holding a standard individual power of attorney can authorize the liquidation of an asset that already sits inside a trust. Only the acting trustee has that authority. And the moment her capacity fades, that trustee is you. She let the silence stretch for a moment before leaning forward, resting her elbows on the polished mahogany. Kerensa, you need to understand the implications of this. If your family recently cornered her into signing a new listing agreement or a secondary power of attorney while she was medically compromised, those papers are entirely worthless. But they don't know that yet. She let that reality hang in the air between us. My father and brother had likely bullied a confused old woman into signing a meaningless piece of paper. The drive back to Oakhaven felt entirely different that night. The quiet house didn't look like a tomb anymore. It looked like a fortress. Through the front bay window, I could see Maria sitting in her faded velvet recliner. The television muttered softly in the background, and her heavy reading glasses rested on the armrest. I let myself in using the brass spare key she had quietly slipped into my coat pocket when I was 16. The exact same key my parents had demanded, and she had stubbornly refused to copy. I walked into the parlor. She looked up, and for 3 or 4 agonizing seconds, her eyes were completely sharp. The pleasant, hazy fog of her dementia had burned off, leaving behind a stare as clear and cold as a frozen lake. "You went to see Beatrix," she stated. It wasn't a question. I froze in the archway. "You remember Beatrix?" She picked up her heavy glasses, running her thumb over the hinges. I remember being terrified. I remember sitting in a lawyer's office, telling her exactly how Evelyn would dismantle my life the second my brain slipped. Did I secure it? I sat gently on the arm of the sofa. You secured it perfectly, Gran. Good. She placed the glasses on her lap, then instantly frowned, as if she had already forgotten why she picked them up. They bring strangers through here on Tuesdays when the visiting nurse comes. Tristan didn't even bother to knock when he showed up the next afternoon. He just pushed the front door open, his heavy keychain jingling, wearing that permanent, arrogant smirk. He walked into rooms like he expected a round of applause. "Hey, Ren," he muttered, dropping a quick, dismissive kiss on the crown of my head. He smelled strongly of expensive cedar cologne and the leather interior of a car he couldn't actually afford. "Just checking in on Gran." He opened her refrigerator, grabbed a sparkling water without asking, and leaned against the granite counter. "Taking a little vacation from the clerk job?" he asked, making the word clerk sound like a terminal disease. I didn't blink. I know about the listing, Tristan. The aluminum can stopped halfway to his mouth. For 2 seconds, he looked genuinely panicked. Then the salesman's smile snapped back into place, harder this time. "It's just a financial reclassification, Ren. My firm hit a massive wall. I have a balloon payment hitting in 6 weeks, over 800 grand. If I default, the bank seizes the company, the current builds everything." He set the can down with a sharp crack. "The house sale fixes everything. Gran gets moved to a high-end memory care wing, Mom and Dad stop stressing, and I don't go bankrupt. It's a win for the whole family. Except for the woman whose house you are stealing," I shot back. Tristan's jaw clenched tight. He stepped into my personal space, towering over me. "Don't play the martyr. We are family. Family bails family out." "Is that the speech you gave her when you shoved the contract in her face?" I asked quietly. He stared at me with pure venom, realizing the charm wasn't working. "The closing is already locked in, Kerensa. Deal with it." He walked out, leaving his wet can dripping condensation onto the pristine counter. Late that night, I started digging through the heavy oak credenza in the hallway. Tucked beneath a stack of old gardening catalogs, I found their dirty work. It was a standard statutory power of attorney, dated September 4th, barely 2 months ago. It named Alistair Vance as the sole agent for all property transfers. Stapled to the back was an exclusive right-to-sell agreement, authorizing Tristan as the seller's representative. I carried the pages to the kitchen and laid them next to the 14-month-old trust documents. The contrast in the signatures made me physically sick. Maria's signature from a year ago was bold, pressing deep into the paper with sweeping, continuous loops. But the signature on Tristan's paperwork was a broken, jagged disaster. The pen had lifted from the paper multiple times. The letter shook violently. This was not the signature of a woman reading a contract. This was the desperate scrawl of a woman whose hand was literally being guided across the page. I pulled up my phone calendar. September 4th. My blood ran completely cold. That was the exact week my mother had texted me about a minor slip and fall. I had found the hospital discharge papers in the recycling bin a week ago. Patient presented with severe temporal disorientation, intermittent delirium, neurological intervention required. They had forced her to sign away her home while she was sitting in a hospital bed, actively delirious. I immediately called Dr. Linwood's clinic the next morning to request her recent neurology chart. Beatrix drove out to the house on Friday. She insisted we spread the paperwork out on Maria's scratched, ancient maple dining table. We lined up the timeline. The recorded trust deed from August of last year, Dr. Linwood's capacity evaluation, then the shaky, coerced September paperwork. Even if she was entirely lucid in September, Beatrix explained, tapping the forged power of attorney, This document does not grant your father the right to pierce a living trust. They are trying to sell a house they legally do not own. Beatrix had already faxed my older durable healthcare directive to the clinic, forcing them to break Alistair's illegal medical blockade. We had the hospital records proving she lacked capacity when Tristan made her sign. That Thursday evening, my mother finally graced us with her presence. Evelyn didn't bring groceries or fresh laundry. She brought a glossy, high-stock brochure for the Willow's Memory Care. She smoothed it out on the table, wearing her signature pearls and a cashmere wrap. It's a gorgeous campus, Kerensa. Private suites, watercolor classes in the afternoon. If we move her by next weekend, Tristan can have the staging furniture in here by the 1st of the month. I stared at her, marveling at the absolute lack of shame. You're staging her living room for a cash buyer you've already secretly contracted. Evelyn's perfectly manicured mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Your brother is drowning financially, she snapped, her voice trembling with what sounded like rehearsed tears. After everything I have sacrificed for you children, you will not blow up his life over an old house. The papers are sitting at Vanguard Escrow, she stated coldly, standing up to leave. The closing happens on November 15th. I didn't argue with her. I just let her walk out. I had exactly 9 days to set the trap. We weren't going to file a slow, expensive probate injunction and give them time to fight back. We were going to let them walk right into... This was the quieter, more brutal path. There would be no dramatic courtroom injunctions, no messy public filings. Just cold, indisputable documents laid flat on a polished table in front of independent witnesses. The aggressive cash buyer, the complicit real estate agent, the meticulous title officer, and my entire fractured family. They would all be confined to one small room. And the paperwork would do the screaming. I thought back to Maria's handwritten note. When they finally come to take the house away from me, she hadn't instructed me to drag my family through the mud in open court. She had given me a weaponized envelope. Let the documentation do the talking, Beatrix had advised me. 9 days until the closing. I went back to Oak Haven and started the countdown. Day 1 of 9. I sat alone in my car, parked right outside the Oak Haven Municipal Building, and dialed the state elder abuse hotline to file a formal report with Adult Protective Services. The intake worker on the line was incredibly patient, frighteningly precise, and completely unfazed by everything I described. When I finally walked back into the old house, the answering machine on the kitchen counter was blinking rapidly. A message from Beatrix. Kerensa, something very interesting just surfaced. My contact at APS informed me, off the record, that your report is not the first one they've received regarding Maria. An anonymous complaint was filed approximately 6 weeks ago. They couldn't pursue it at the time because the caller refused to leave contact information. But the file exists. 6 weeks ago. That aligned perfectly with the timeline of Tristan forcing Maria to sign the fraudulent September power of attorney. Somebody else had witnessed what was happening. Somebody who hadn't possessed the courage to leave their name, but had possessed enough conscience to pick up the telephone. I had no idea who it was. Not yet. But the existence of that preliminary file meant APS wasn't starting from absolute zero. The wheels of the system turned slower than my own anger. But they were definitely turning. Day 4. My father arrived entirely alone. He crept into the gravel driveway driving his 10-year-old sedan. Not the polished SUV he drove to the country club, but the beat-up car he used for hardware store runs. The one nobody in town would recognize. I watched him from behind the kitchen blinds. He sat behind the steering wheel for an agonizingly long time, before finally killing the engine. His shoulders were slumped forward. He looked significantly smaller and older than I remembered. He walked around to the back door, entering the house the exact same way he had since he was a little boy with scraped knees. He didn't even acknowledge my presence at first. He just stood motionless in the center of the kitchen, staring at the heavy oak cabinets his mother had sanded and stained by hand. He looked at the crystal prism hanging over the sink, the one that cast rainbows across the linoleum every morning. "She used to sing in this room," Alistair whispered, his voice cracking. "Patsy Cline, every Sunday morning before church." "I remember," I replied softly.
He sat down heavily at the maple table. He pressed his palms flat against the wood, and I could clearly see his hands trembling. "I know exactly what you think of me," he muttered, staring at the grain. I didn't offer a polite contradiction. I just waited. I didn't want this. Any of this. But Tristan is drowning. Evelyn insists liquidating the house is the only viable option. And, Mom? His voice fractured entirely, like a microscopic crack expanding in a concrete foundation. Mom would never want Tristan to lose his livelihood. "You have the power to stop this right now, Dad," I told him. He looked up at me for one split second, one terrible, trembling second. Beneath the expensive suit and the country club tan, I saw the terrified boy who had grown up in this exact room, who had eaten birthday cake off these plates, who had been carried upstairs to bed by the woman now sleeping in the adjacent room. Suddenly, his phone vibrated loudly against the table. The screen lit up. Evelyn. He immediately stood up, the moment of vulnerability vanishing. "I have to go." He practically bolted out the back door. He didn't even walk down the hall to say goodbye to his mother. I took his dirty coffee cup to the sink, washed it, and put it away. Day 5. I bought a new cake. Nothing elaborate, just a simple 6-inch vanilla round with basic buttercream from the local bakery on Elm Street. I bought one single candle, reasoning that 79 individual flames might trigger the smoke alarms, and I desperately wanted to make her smile. At 3 o'clock, I set it on the kitchen table, arranged 2 dessert plates, and brewed a pot of Earl Grey. "Gran, come sit," I called out. She shuffled slowly from the parlor, her heavy reading glasses pushed up into her white hair, a folded crossword puzzle sticking out of her cardigan pocket. She saw the cake and stopped dead in her tracks. "Whose birthday is it?" "Yours," I smiled. "We are doing a proper redo." She sat down carefully as I lit the single candle. She stared at the small flame with an intense, deliberate focus, as if by staring hard enough, she could force the memory of this moment to permanently stick in her fracturing mind. "Make a wish," I told her. She squeezed her eyes shut and blew. The tiny flame extinguished instantly. "What did you wish for?" She looked at me, her eyes as clear as creek water over stones. "I wished that you would stay." We ate the cake with proper forks this time. She spent 20 minutes telling me about the purple hydrangeas she had planted along the front walkway in the spring of 1994, the year I was born. She explained how this very maple table had been hauled down from her own mother's house in Bridgeport, strapped to the back of a rusted pickup truck in 1974. Every nick and scratch on its surface represented a chaotic Thanksgiving dinner she had proudly hosted. Then she slowly placed her silver fork down and leaned across the table. "Do not let them take my table, Kerensa," she whispered, her voice fierce and completely lucid. "I won't, Gran," I promised. "The table stays right here." I cleared the dishes, wrapped the remaining cake in aluminum foil, and wrote "Gran's birthday round 2" across the top with a black marker. 4 days until the closing. Day 6. The coordinated phone calls began. My Aunt Sylvia, my father's older cousin, was the first to strike. Her tone was cautious, dripping with rehearsed concern. "Kerensa, sweetheart, your mother mentioned that you were attempting to seize control of Miria's finances. She used the word manipulating." I held the phone 6 inches from my ear, staring blankly at the ceiling plaster. "Aunt Sylvia,
Did Evelyn happen to mention that she and Tristan are actively trying to sell Gran's home while Gran is suffering from advanced dementia? Dead silence on the other end. She told me it was a unified family decision, Sylvia finally stammered. It is a decision Gran literally cannot make, I replied, ending the call. My mother's closest friend from the hospital charity board called an hour later, then Tristan's junior business partner, then a woman from the historical society who had known Miria for 40 years. Every single call followed the exact same script, featuring minor variations on a central theme crafted by my mother. Kerensa is overstepping her bounds. Kerensa is highly emotional. Kerensa fundamentally misunderstands the complexity of the family's financial obligations.
Evelyn was doing what Evelyn did best. She was aggressively shaping the public narrative before I even had an opportunity to defend myself. I didn't bother trying to counter it. I didn't post frantic updates on social media. I didn't return a single phone call to plead my case. Beatrix's words echoed in my head. The documents will speak. You do not have to. But late on day 6, around 9 in the evening, my phone rang one last time. It was Aunt Josephine, Miriam's younger sister. She was 81, living in Bridgeport, and her mind was still razor sharp. Kerensa. Her voice was crisp and dry over the line. I do not believe a single syllable Evelyn is peddling, and I want you to know exactly why. Why? I asked. Because your grandmother called me last August. She told me she had sat down with a serious lawyer. She explicitly said she was locking the house down while her brain still worked. She told me, if the vultures start circling, back Kerensa up. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. I am backing you up, Josephine stated firmly. Whatever you need, let them burn. 3 days until the closing. Day 7. Beatrix and I finalized the logistics. Vanguard Escrow Services, November 15th, exactly 2 p.m., Conference Room B. The assigned escrow officer was a woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation, who had 22 years of pristine experience in title law. Beatrix's inside contact described Eleanor as ruthless and strictly by the book. The buyer was Apex Capital Group, a predatory regional firm that specialized in acquiring distressed residential properties for cash, flipping them, and moving on rapidly. Their acquisition manager, Marcus Thorne, was carbon copied on all the contracts. Clarissa Thorne would be present as the listing agent. Evelyn and Tristan would attend as the authorized sellers' representatives. Alistair would be there simply because Evelyn commanded him to be. But Beatrix had made one final, off-the-record call to the title company that completely shifted the board. Eleanor flagged the file 3 weeks ago, Beatrix explained over the phone. During the preliminary title search, she discovered the property was legally held within a trust. She immediately contacted Clarissa Thorne for an explanation. Clarissa promptly submitted a signed affidavit claiming the trust had been formally dissolved and the property had been reconveyed back to Maria as an individual. Eleanor accepted the affidavit provisionally to keep the timeline moving, but she flagged the file because she couldn't locate a recorded reconveyance deed in the county database. The closing is currently listed as tentative, pending final title clearance. I let out a sharp breath. Clarissa lied in writing. She told a title officer the trust was dissolved. Exactly, Beatrix said smoothly, which is entirely false. The trust was never dissolved, and the original deed is still safely recorded. The entire transaction is currently standing on a frozen lake that is already cracking. Eleanor had a flag in the file. Clarissa Thorne had committed fraud. The recorded trust deed was a matter of unchangeable public record. All we needed was a person to physically drop the original certified document onto the conference table. 2 days left. Day 8. Every piece was locked into position. Beatrix would attend the closing as Maria's attorney of record, officially representing the trust. She was bringing certified copies of the recorded trust deed, the durable power of attorney, and the physician's capacity evaluation. Julian Finch would attend as our independent notary witness. APS had assigned an investigator named Brenda Cole. Brenda wouldn't physically be in the room, that wasn't protocol, but she confirmed the elder abuse investigation was active and time-sensitive.
Whatever transpired at that closing table would immediately become part of her official state file. I spent the afternoon at the maple table, reviewing the paper trail one final time. Trust deed, power of attorney, capacity.
I was no longer the daughter they casually dismissed. I was no longer the paperwork clerk. I was the legally appointed successor trustee of the Maria H. Vance Revocable Living Trust, and I possessed every legal right to sit at that mahogany table. In fact, it was my legal obligation. That evening, I carefully ironed a sharp white blouse and polished my practical work loafers, the exact same scuffed shoes I had worn the night I drove 3 hours to sing a lonely birthday song to a woman abandoned in her kitchen. Tomorrow afternoon, my family would sit down to sign away a house that legally did not belong to them, and I was going to be sitting right across from them when they found out. The night before the closing, I sat quietly with Maria in the dim parlor. She was experiencing a rare good hour. Not a good day, but a genuinely good hour. She was working on a Sunday crossword puzzle, her reading glasses sliding down her nose, aggressively filling in the tiny squares with a blue ballpoint pen. She always used a pen, insisting that pencils were for cowards who didn't trust their own judgment. "Gran, tomorrow is going to be a very big day," I murmured softly. She hummed without looking up. 7 across. Legal instrument of protection. 5 letters. I smiled, a tight, nervous feeling in my chest. Trust. She wrote it in firmly. Smarty pants. I watched her frail hand move across the paper. The pen moved slowly, but with deliberate intention. The letters were small and careful, not the sweeping, confident loops from 14 months ago, but I am not a ghost yet, she had told me. I tucked her handwritten note deep into my leather wallet, right next to my identification. The next morning, that fragile note, the heavy wax-sealed envelope, and I drove down to the title office together. Vanguard Escrow Services occupied a sleek, low-slung glass building on Commerce Street, featuring heavily tinted privacy windows and a ridiculously polished brass door handle. I parked my old, sputtering sedan across the street at exactly 1:45. Beatrix pulled into the adjacent parking spot 3 minutes later. Julian, her independent notary, was already inside, waiting in the lobby. We walked through the heavy double doors as a united front. Beatrix carried her structured leather briefcase. I held the manila folder. Conference room C was claustrophobically small. It held a cold glass table, 8 rolling ergonomic chairs, a sweating pitcher of ice water, and a high-speed printer humming relentlessly in the corner. Eleanor Vance, the senior escrow officer, was meticulously aligning stacks of blue-backed paper at the head of the glass table. She glanced up as we walked in, her eyes locking onto Beatrix. Her hands immediately stopped moving. "Miss Hawthorne, I did not see your firm listed anywhere on this transaction ledger." "I legally represent the Maria H. Vance Revocable Living Trust," Beatrix stated smoothly, pulling out a chair. "We brought documentation highly relevant to this specific closing." Before Eleanor could formulate a reply, the heavy glass door swung open behind us. Evelyn walked in first, radiating country club energy in a tailored cream blazer, her socialite smile pinned perfectly in place. Tristan swaggered in right behind her, clutching a leather folio, his jaw clenched tight. My father, Alastair, trailed them like a shadow, his eyes glued to the carpet. Clarissa Thorne, the real estate agent, clacked in on high heels, fanning papers like she had already won the lottery. Finally, Marcus from Apex Capital stepped in, checking his luxury watch. Evelyn spotted me and froze entirely. Her painted smile didn't move, but the muscles in her neck tightened. "Kerensa, what on earth are you doing here?" "Taking my seat," I replied. I placed the thick manila folder squarely in front of me and folded my hands over it. The room abruptly fell dead silent. Even the printer in the corner seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor Vance shifted her intense gaze from my mother back to Beatrix. "You mentioned you brought documentation?" "I did," Beatrix replied, snapping the brass latches of her briefcase.
She placed 3 distinct items onto the glass table, one by one, centering them deliberately, like a prosecutor laying out a murder weapon. First, a certified, county-stamped copy of the recorded trust deed. This was officially filed with the Oakhaven County Clerk on August 12th of last year. It irrevocably transfers the physical property at 42 Elmwood Drive into the Maria H. Vance Revocable Living Trust. Kerensa, Beatrix gestured slightly toward me, is the designated successor trustee. The color drained from Evelyn's face in slow, terrifying stages. Second, Beatrix continued, a durable power of attorney naming Kerensa as Maria's exclusive medical and financial agent, executed that exact same week. It is fully notarized and currently active. Tristan slammed his hand flat on the glass. That is garbage. We have a recently executed power of attorney that completely supersedes. Third, Beatrix cut him off cleanly, placing a crisp hospital letterhead on the table. A comprehensive clinical capacity evaluation by Dr. Linwood, Maria's primary neurologist. It confirmed she possessed absolute testamentary capacity when she formed this trust. I also brought Dr. Linwood's evaluation from last Thursday, confirming she now entirely lacks capacity. Therefore, any paperwork your family coerced her into signing during her cognitive decline, including the fraudulent September POA you produced, was executed without legal competence. The oxygen vanished from the room. Eleanor Vance picked up her certified deed. She read it twice, comparing the county stamps to the preliminary title report sitting in her own file. She slowly looked up at the real estate agent. Clarissa, you explicitly told me in writing that this trust had been legally dissolved. Clarissa physically stepped backward. Evelyn assured me it was handled. The trust was never dissolved, Beatrix stated flatly. This house belongs to the trust.
Eleanor Vance dropped the paperwork onto the desk, squared her shoulders, and delivered the execution order. I am immediately voiding this transaction. We cannot close. Maria had remembered. She had remembered absolutely everything. Marcus sharply closed his leather binder, muttered a curse under his breath, and walked right out the door without looking back. Clarissa Thorne stared blankly at the ice water. Tristan gripped the edge of the glass table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. Evelyn looked at me as if I had shoved her out of a moving vehicle. The shocked silence held for exactly 4 seconds before my mother shattered it. "This is a ridiculous stunt!" Her voice went shrill. She stood up, her expensive pearls knocking against the table. "Kerensa is an entry-level clerk. She has zero authority. My husband is Maria's only living child." "A son who secured a signature from a woman actively hospitalized for severe delirium," Beatrix countered, her tone dangerously even. "A document with zero medical clearance. A document that, even if it were legitimate, does not allow him to touch assets locked inside a trust." Tristan launched out of his chair. He didn't use Evelyn's theatrical anger. His voice was pure, raw panic. "I have an $800,000 balloon payment hitting in 6 weeks. If this cash falls through..." "Your personal debts are not the concern of Vanguard Escrow," Eleanor interrupted sharply. "Or the concern of this trust," Beatrix added. "You are going to completely destroy this family," Tristan hissed, stepping toward me. I didn't flinch. I kept my voice at the exact conversational volume I had practiced in my kitchen. "You tried to liquidate a 79-year-old woman's home while she sat alone at her dining table eating a birthday cake you couldn't be bothered to show up for. You dragged her to a notary while she was delirious. You lied to a federal title officer about a dissolved trust. And you are standing here telling me that I am the one destroying the family?" Evelyn burst into loud, messy, performative sobs. "After everything I have sacrificed." My father, Alastair, had not moved a single muscle since walking into the room. He just stared blankly at the certified trust deed, tracing his mother's confident signature with his eyes. He was doing the brutal math in his head.
She had planned this entire ambush. She had looked at her only son and decided he was a complete liability. Beatrix spoke directly over my mother's crying. For the official record, an Adult Protective Services investigation regarding the financial exploitation of Maria Vance is currently active. Any further attempts to encumber or transfer this property will be referred to the district attorney. Evelyn stopped crying instantly. The wet tears remained on her cheeks, but the underlying expression hardened into pure venom. "You will regret this," she spat at me. "When Tristan loses his entire company, when your father goes bankrupt, you will remember that you did this." I stood up slowly. I slid the manila folder back into my bag. I looked at the cashmere, the perfect hair, the tears she used like loose change. Tristan's massive balloon payment came due exactly 6 weeks later. He missed it entirely. The regional bank aggressively initiated foreclosure on his luxury development projects, 3 unfinished modern estates in Westville and a commercial plaza downtown. Vance Custom Estates officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in late January. He surrendered his electric sports car to the bank. The last rumor I heard, he was working as a mid-level site manager for a rival firm, earning a fraction of his former lifestyle. He never once called to apologize. Evelyn's social standing in Oakhaven did not collapse overnight. It eroded slowly, the way reputations do in wealthy suburbs. People talk. Aunt Josephine definitely talked. Eleanor Vance kept the fraudulent closing attempt in the official town records. The country club group chat where Evelyn posted her Aspen selfies went totally silent. She eventually resigned from the Heritage Board. By spring, my parents quietly downsized to a generic condo 2 towns over. My father sent me one single email in March. It read, "I should have protected her. I know that now. I am sorry." I read it twice, deleted it, and never replied. Adult Protective Services formally substantiated my complaint. Following 2 quiet probate hearings that my family lacked the money to contest, the forged September POA was legally shredded. I was officially appointed as Maria's permanent guardian. I deferred my bar exam indefinitely, packed up my apartment, and moved into the spare room with the cracked ceiling. I became the person who made sure Maria Vance took her blood pressure medication and sat on the porch when the afternoon sun hit the hydrangeas. On a random Tuesday in April, I baked an almond torte. I set it on the ancient maple table. Maria wandered in, squinting. "Whose birthday is it?" "Nobody's," I said, handing her a fork. "We are having torte because it is Tuesday." She took a bite, chewing slowly. "This is my recipe. Do not let anyone change it." We sat in the quiet kitchen, the crystal prism throwing rainbows across the floor.